All right, you ready for chapter 23? And see how exciting this little land deal is? Let's find out together. We'll read the whole thing. Now, Sarah lived 127 years, the years of the life of Sarah. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba. That's a rabbit hole we won't get into. That is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Then Abraham arose from before his dead and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, I am a stranger and a foreign resident among you. Give me a burial site among you so that I may bury my dead out of my sight. The sons of Heth answered Abraham, saying to him, Shema, my Lord, you are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our graves. None of us will refuse you his grave for burying your dead. So Abraham stood up and bowed to the people of the land, the sons of Heth. And he spoke with them, saying, if you are willing to bury my dead out of my sight, Shema to me, and plead with Ephron, the son of Zohar, for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns, which is at the end of his field. For the full price, let him give it to me in your presence for a burial site. Now Ephron was sitting among the sons of Heth, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham, so that the sons of Heth heard, that is, all who entered this gate of the city, saying, no, my Lord, Shema to me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. In the presence of the sons of my people, I give it to you. Bury your dead. And Abraham bowed before the people of the land, but he spoke to Ephron so that the people of the land heard, saying, if you will only please Shema to me, I will give the price of the field, accept it from me so that I may bury my dead there. Then Ephron answered Abraham, saying to him, my Lord, listen to me. Land worth, 400 shekels of silver? What is that between me and you? So bury your dead. Abraham shamad to Ephron. And Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver which he had named in the presence of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver, acceptable to a merchant. So Ephron's field, which was in Machpelah, which faced Mamre, the field and the cave which was in it, and all the trees which were in the field, that were within all the confines of its border, were deeded over to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the sons of Heth before all who entered the gate of his city. And after this, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave that was in it were deeded over to Abraham for a burial site by the sons of Heth. Okay, so this chapter is dealing with the problem of inheritance. And the problem of inheritance is, if you recall, multiple places in the Abraham story, Yahweh has given Abraham the whole of the land of Canaan. So 5 times. In Genesis 12:7, to your offspring will I give this land. In Genesis 13:7, go walk through the length and breadth of this land, for I'm giving it to you. It's actually an expanded gift. Genesis 15:18, to your descendants I've given this land, from the river of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. Again in Genesis 17:8, I will give to you and your descendants after you the land. So this is all the land stuff in Genesis 22 as well. So the issue is there are people living there. Yahweh is giving Avraham all this land, and there are people already there, and they have not gotten the memo. And also, Yahweh himself said, this is not yet. The land is a not yet thing. He says this in Genesis 15:16. He says, in the fourth generation, they'll return here for the avon, iniquity, the wrongdoing of the Amorite is not yet complete. So the current inhabitants are going to have time and opportunity to make things right by God and others, right, become righteous, before their avon, before their iniquity, which is, the word avon is so cool because it can be used for iniquity. It can also be used for ruin. So sometimes it gets used like as a word play, is the avon of the people was great, iniquity, so therefore Yahweh brought avon, or ruin, upon them. So the idea there is that avon kind of bears the fruit of its own consequences. So a flood of ruin is going to be coming to these inhabitants, but it's not time yet. Yahweh's giving them time. A few verses before this, Yahweh also said, look, they're going to be enslaved to another people for 400 years. They're going to be oppressed. So we've got hundreds and hundreds of years before the promise of land is going to be fulfilled. So what's Avraham supposed to do now? How does he claim a stake in this land that Yahweh has promised? And there's a few options. He can take the option of just gathering his forces and conquering some of it. Remember, just 318 dudes that were with him, he held off 4 invading armies, actually defeated them. So I would think he could probably do well with 318 dudes. What if he just says, okay, we're going to take authority over this land spiritually. I'm just going to say, in the name of Yahweh, I declare that this land is mine. Maybe I'll go to Melchizedek, the king, and get his buy-in on it also. And together we're going to just anoint all the corners of the land, and it'll be mine by faith in Yahweh's name. He could do that. So another option is, last week we talked about tzaddik, doing right by God and others. So he could take the route of doing right by people. But what people would he be doing right by? The people that live there, they're pagan, they worship idols, they're wicked, they're not the chosen, they're descendants of Canaan, who was cursed, his line was cursed. So does it seem like a good option to do right by this kind of people? Well, let's kind of look at the story of Avraham so far and his doing right by pattern. He did right by, he showed tzaddik to the people of the land, who were these people, these kinds of people, by rescuing them with Lot after the invasion of the 4 armies. Remember, collateral mercy? Avraham also showed tzaddik, doing right by, to the local inhabitants by dwelling together in peace with the Amorite named Mamre and his brothers. They were like buds. Avraham showed tzaddik to the local inhabitants by interceding on behalf of the cities of the plain. They didn't deserve it, but he interceded on their behalf. So this is a thing that is recurring in Avraham's life. And now he's about to partner with Yahweh's heart to receive a down payment on the promise by doing right by showing tzaddik to the current inhabitants. This is what the story is modeling for us. So what's the catalyst of this tzaddik, of this righteousness? What is it that sparks all this? It's Avraham's love for Sarah. So verse 1 and 2. Sarah lived 127 years, the years of the life of Sarah. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, that's Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Avraham came in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. So it's interesting that the Moses writing team chooses to start this whole story off with 127. It's a significant number to them. Numbers sometimes, many times, have significance symbolically. So it's a real number. The claim is that she really did live 127 years, but they want to mention this because it's a significant number to them. 100 is a number that often means fullness. 20, sometimes in Hebrew literature, means beauty. 7, as we all know, is a sacred number of creation. So the idea here is that she's representing the full life of a beautiful person whose legacy is part of Yahweh's intention for redeeming creation. But later biblical authors pull off of this number, and this is another writing team, hundreds and hundreds of years later, the writing team that put together the book of Esther. They also point out the number 127 for some of the same reasons, but this is not a coincidence. The Esther team sees a link, and so Esther, 127 are the provinces that she is queen over. Letters have been sent to save the Jewish people in all 127 of those promises, and she was the one that was the true Eitzer, the rescuer, the first responder that allowed the Jewish people to be saved. And she has gathered her people fully, 100. Her beauty has been used to secure, that's the 20, a legacy of redemption for God's plans and creation, that's the 7. So in other words, she's an empress of the space of the 127 provinces. Here in Genesis, and I think this is a reflection of the Esther team, the burial sequence is related to 127 years, not provinces. So it's time, not space. This burial will lead to the first plot of land legally owned by Abraham's descendants. Hope for the future. Sarah is an elect empress of time. So Esther, the elect empress of space, Sarah, the elect empress of time, and they both are functioning in the role of someone that appears very early in the Bible. All right, which we will get to in a minute. She died. All right. So it says that she lived 127 years. This was the life of Sarah. The word there is chava. Chava is Hebrew for Eve. So biblical authors, this is a little clue in here, that Sarah is a new Eve. She is in the role of Eve and new creation, because Abraham and Sarah are the new chosen humans through whom the chosen seed, the Messiah, is going to come. So at any rate, let's just throw that in there. So she died in a place that became Hebron, and this is a place between Bethel and Ai, as we talked about, pass and fail. He's always been living between those places, so Hebron is between those places. Near the trees of Mamre. Mamre means, is kind of a play on the word vision or seeing, but it's also the name of a Gentile that Abraham was buds with and hung out with, where so many promises were made there by Yahweh at that spot. That's also where King David set up his first capital. You know, David would have been good to go to that marriage conference too. Any rate, Sarah is a woman of significance who died in a significant place. What's the other woman in the narrative so far that gets this kind of attention? It's Eve. It's Eve. So Abraham came to mourn and weep. So it includes crying, but I don't want you to think of this as just crying. This mourning, weeping is crying. The mourning in the ancient Near East goes way beyond. We kind of have our own lens on what mourning is, and everybody mourns in their own way. But as far as our outward expression of mourning in today's culture, it's small compared to the ancient Near East. Think of like our view of the outward expression of mourning, the passing of a loved one, is something like maybe a hall closet. It's there, but we try to, keep it private, right? Maybe a bedroom closet. But the ancient Near East, it's like the whole city of Vancouver. It's huge, it's expressive. Everybody is participating through their observation in your mourning. So including ritual shaving of the head, tearing of clothes, the wearing of sackcloth, fasting, outward expressions of grief. This is what we're supposed to see. This is what the ancient Israelites would see when they see the word mourn. This is how Avraham acts. He's in her death tent. He's at her side. There's an extreme expression of grief here. So far in the narrative, you may have noticed that there hasn't been any sort of talk about what Abraham's true feelings for Sarah are. Biblical authors don't usually describe those things. They show them in how things work out. So his feelings for Sarah have kind of been ambiguous at best, haven't they? He repeatedly risks her life to protect his life. He gets angry with her, that whole expressiveness of anger with the expulsion of Ishmael. He apparently doesn't even involve her in the binding of Isaac in that whole scene. So the text is almost like provoking in us a sense of recognizing that there's a tenderness deficit. You could almost get to that conclusion. But in this particular place, in this strategic spot in the story of Avraham, we finally get some insight into their intimate life together. And it's this, it's his mourning and his weeping. Avraham, he loves Sarah. This is a reflection of how much Yahweh loves Sarah, as we saw in chapter 21. And so what is about to follow is really all about Sarah, even though she's not a dialogue character. She has passed away. She's not talking here. But it is surrounding her, not just the circumstance of her death, but her herself, as we'll see. Verse 3. Avraham arose from before his dead and spoke to the sons of Het, saying, I am a stranger and foreign resident among you. Give me a burial site among you so that I may bury my dead out of my sight. So the sons of Het, there's argument about this, but many scholars believe this is another way of talking about the Hittites, who hundreds of years later formed an empire in the area that is now Turkey, and which then fell apart before the time of King David. But in any case, there were people of this people group who were living, along with other peoples and other people groups, in the land of Canaan. I am a stranger and foreign resident among you. So, according to the legal customs of the people who lived there, the Canaanites, he had no standing in the community. The reason he had no standing, because he had no land ownership. He's a nomadic visitor. He dwells in tents and flocks and moves around the land. He's a nomad. He has no land. So the issue is there's no place to bury close family. And he says, give me a burial site. So he's asking the local people to solve his problem by giving him a place to bury Sarah. So to the first readers, this means something different than it probably means to you reading this the first time. What it means to you and me reading this the first time in our culture is, give me a burial plot, right? So that I can put my wife's body there and then that'll be where she stays. That is not what the ancient Israelites are thinking. A rock-cut tomb is what they're thinking. Because of course you can put bones in the earth and so forth. But an actual burial site, that's a rock-cut tomb. This is a piece of land that is owned by you and your family that includes some sort of rocky hill that you have taken the time and effort to cut into, a type of chamber that there's at least one, but as many as 3 or 4 or 5 alcoves with a flat space that you can put the body of a deceased loved one or relative. The body, under normal circumstances, would not stay there. How it worked in the ancient Near Eastern world is you would put the body there for a period of time, more than a year. And then after sufficient time had passed for the body to completely decompose, you would take the bones out and put the bones somewhere else, and that spot could be reused. So where would they put the bones in these times is a little bit uncertain. Ancient Persia had special wells dug that were very deep that bones would go into, possibly buried in the ground. In Jesus' time, the bones would be taken out and put in a box that would be called an ossuary, and people that had some means would use ossuaries, use these boxes. The body wouldn't stay in the rock-cut tomb. So this is what the first readers would assume the Canaanites think that Abraham is asking for. He's not asking for a permanent spot. He's asking for, can I lease for the period of time it takes the body to decompose, can I use one of y'all's rock-cut tombs for that time? That's what they're thinking. So, verse 5, this is how they respond to that request, what they think is the request. The sons of Heth answered Abraham, saying to him, Shema, my Lord, hear, listen. You are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our graves. None of us will refuse you his grave for burying your dead. No, you can use anyone. It's fine. Anyone you want. So, interestingly, instead of referring to Abraham as a stranger and foreigner, which is how he refers to himself, he comes to them in a lowly stance. He's like, look, I'm a nobody here. So I'm making this request of you. They turn around and call him Lord and a Prince of Elohim. This is like a sub-theme that runs throughout Scripture, which is humble yourself and you'll be exalted, but exalt yourself and you'll be brought low. It's like God lifts up the humble, doesn't he? But what does he do with the proud? He resists the proud. So this is a theme throughout Scripture. And this is exactly what happens here. They lift him up in honor. And they extravagantly grant what they think is the request. Lay Sarah's body in the best of our chambers. Then, when the time comes, you just take the bones out and do whatever you do, but you can use any one of these. But Abraham has another purpose to this. Verse 7. Abraham stood up, bowed to the people of the land, the sons of Heth, and he spoke with them, saying, if you're willing to bury my dead out of my sight, Shema, listen to me, and plead with Ephron the son of Zohar for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns, which is at the end of his field, for the full price. Let him give it to me in your presence for a burial site. So this is a much bigger ask. Abraham is not just looking for a place to let Sarah's body decompose. He wants to buy and own a particular burial chamber, which would make him a landowner. And this has generational significance because unless he sells it, it's going to belong to his family forever. Sarah is going to be the first one to inhabit the first fruits of the promise of land. This is really significant. Now, and he's got his eye on a particular rock-cut tomb, and it belongs to this guy named Ephron. Now, Ephron was sitting among the sons of Heth while this conversation was taking place. And Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham so that the sons of Heth heard, meaning all who entered the gate of the city, saying, no, my Lord, listen to me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. Look here, in the presence of the sons of my people, I give it to you. Bury your dead. So doing something in the presence of people, that's like signing a contract. There's no contract paperwork, electronic signatures, anything like that. And in this day, if it's going to be a signed, sealed, and delivered, that it has to happen in front of numerous witnesses. So Ephron, he's here. He's got another plan that's going to make him look really good and generous. And that's just to give Abraham the cave and the whole field that's with it. It's likely a substantial plot. It's got trees, and he wants to do this for free. In other words, Abraham, you don't have to pay anything. We're just going to give this to you. So he's officially, publicly ratified this amazing gift. And this, normally, we'd be like, well, this seems like a decent deal. but in the ancient Near East, a gift comes with strings. And there's a couple of problems that a foreigner like Avraham would face if he just receives this as a gift. Number one, a gift is a lot more easily revoked, especially in future generations, than an actual purchase. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, a gift comes with relationship expectations and obligations to the giver. Avraham, in other words, would become something like one of Ephron's people by receiving this. Let me see if I can give you a little bit more modern analogy. In my family, my grandparents, my abuelo and abuela, were married in the mid-30s, 1930s, in the city of Santiago in Cuba. And they got married in kind of a small private ceremony, and then they went on a short honeymoon. And when they got back to their home, which had like a latticed porch to it, they noticed that people all over the community had brought presents galore. And from the floor to ceiling, all through that enclosed patio, they had brought wedding presents to them. And they were telling me this story when I was a teenager, and I'm like, wow, that is so generous. And then my abuela, my grandmother, she's like getting flustered and she's mumbling under her breath. And my grandfather said, well, I gave them all back. He says, what I did is I took each present, figured out where the person lived, and even if it was across the city, I'd take the trolley, and I brought the present to each person, and I would say, thank you very much, but I can take care of my wife, myself. And I'm like, what? Who does that? And, again, my grandmother, she's 50 years later, she's like, it was so embarrassed and it was so awkward. And I'm like, why did you do that? He says, well, you have to understand. When you receive a gift, it's not like the United States. When you receive a gift in Cuba, the person who's given you that gift expects every birthday, every wedding, every holiday, every second cousin's, baptism. You have to give them presents. And he says, I could not afford all these presents. I'm like, oh, I never thought of that. Some of you have come from cultures where you get this, and this times probably 100 is what's going on here in the ancient Near East. If he accepts this gift from Ephron, then he is accepting a lifetime and multi-generations probably of obligations to this Hittite man. So, verse 12, Avraham bowed before the people of the land, but he spoke to Ephron so that the people of the land heard, saying, if only you will please Shema, listen to me. I will give the price of the field, accept from me so that I may bury my dead there. So he wants to pay for it. Then Ephron answered Avraham, saying to him, oh, my Lord, Shema to me. Land worth 400 shekels of silver? What is that between me and you? So bury your dead. So Avraham begins the very biggest ask with humility. He bows before the people, but he insists on paying for this. And paying for it makes revocation basically impossible, at least, the sight of all these people. Ephron would lose so much standing if he took it back, knowing that it had been paid for. But it would also avoid the entanglement of obligation and relationship, which Avraham wants to avoid that. He just wants to own it straight up. And Ephron, he's still using the language of you don't have to, this is a gift, because he's got to save face. But in the midst of it, he kind of sneaks in the first price, the beginning of the haggling process, which is an exorbitant price, 400 shekels of silver. So this is approximately 7.5 troy pounds, which is a lot of money. Is a lot of money back then. So don't think, obviously, there's no Venmo. There's also no paper money. There's also no coins at the time that this would happen. So a shekel does, in our minds, because we're thinking of maybe in Jesus' day when there were coins, or today, well, a shekel must be a coin, and it's not. It's not. A shekel is a measurement of weight. So is a gram a coin, or is an ounce a coin? No, it's a unit of weight. This shekel, this type of shekel, it means a weight that equals to about somewhere in the vicinity of 8 grams, they think, or perhaps a quarter of a troy ounce. So 400 of these is 400 like, it might be one big glob of silver. More likely, it's bits of silver or pieces or ingots, maybe even jewelry, although normally there'd be a premium for the workmanship of that. Whatever is silver of a certain purity acceptable to the merchants of that time, this is the weight of it. Money was figured in terms of weight, or cattle, or something else of actual value. The idea of, in these times, of accepting something because some governing authority said it was worth this much, they would have just laughed at you, said, right, yeah, I'm gonna accept that. This piece of paper? Yeah, I'll take that. Sure, it's pretty. It just wouldn't have even crossed their minds. It had to have substantial value in and of itself. So, verse 16, Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver, he's weighing it, the silver which he had named in the presence of the sons of Het. Oh, some of you may be wondering here, when did coins come around? We think around 650 BC was the invention of coinage in the area that is now Turkey. So anyway, random fact in case you're ever at a party and it comes up in trivia and you're standing there with your Bible and your non-alcoholic drink and it says, when was the invention of coinage? What century? And if you say 7th century BC, you're gonna win. And everyone will gather around you because you're so wise. Happens to me all the time. Okay. 400 shekels of silver acceptable to a merchant. So Abraham, he listened, he shamad. He acquired the land according to the wishes of the people of the land, even though Yahweh promised to just give it all to him. This is tzaddik. This is doing right by other people. He wasn't worried about what's just for him, what Yahweh had promised. Yahweh's promise, he's gonna partner with that in doing right by people who don't deserve it. Doesn't matter. He's gonna do right by them. And he didn't haggle, which is unheard of. This is the ancient Near East. Even the current Near East is unheard of. Of course you haggle. 400 shekels of silver was the starting price. And when you maybe come in at 100 and then you meet somewhere in the middle. He's jumping at the opportunity at legal generational ownership. And he pays according to their scales. This is crazy. It's awesome. So, verse 17. So Ephron's field, which was in Machpelah, which faced Mamre, the field and the cave which was in it, and all the trees which were in the field, that were within all the confines of its border, were deeded over to Abraham as a possession in the presence of the sons of Het, before all who entered the gate of his city. And after this, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave that was in it were deeded over to Abraham for, have we been here before? For a burial site by the sons of Het. When you see repetition, what might be going on? A chiasm. It's exactly what we have here. This is a mini chiasm. So the first part of it, it talks about Ephron, who's a Hittite, right? The last part of it, the sons of Het, the Hittites. Next, we read about how it's facing Mamre, and there's the field and the cave and how they were deeded. That's repeated. You know, in verse 20, the cave and the field facing Mamre were deeded. Verses 19 and 20. But in the middle there, verse 18 and the first part of verse 19, it talks about Abraham taking possession and burying Sarah. So the central focus of the chiasm is that this cave and this field and these trees which face the place of vision and seeing, the centrality of it is it's now a permanent possession of Abraham and his family. But most importantly, Sarah, the recipient of generational promise, we found it in chapter 21. She has been planted there. Sarah is like a seed whose presence in the land is going to sprout this tribal confederation in Joshua and Judges, a kingdom with Saul and David and Solomon and a little bit of Rehoboam, and then a split kingdom, and the coming eventually of the Mashiach, the Messiah, who's he's gonna bless all of the people of Abraham, but not just Abraham's descendants, but all the nations. It's gonna come to pass. And Sarah is the seed that is planted there. So in the narratively near future, which we're not gonna talk about too much in this class, but in future classes, other people will be buried in the same burial cave, including someone who provides another huge plot twist to the narrative. Read this quote by Gordon Wenham, who's provides one of my favorite commentaries on the book of Genesis. He says, here, Abraham acquires a very small part of Canaan, small part of the promised land. But that reminds us how much was still to become his. And most probably, it was faith in the eventual fulfillment of this promise, as well as a sense of family solidarity that led to Abraham himself and his son Yitzhak and his daughter-in-law, as well as his grandson Yaakov and his first wife Leah being buried in the same grave. Their attitude, declares Hebrews chapter 11, verses 13 and 16, this is New Testament, is an example to all believers who should look forward to the eventual fulfillment of God's promises. Quoting from Hebrews 11, these all died in faith, not having received what was promised, but having seen it and greeted it from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. It's coming from this passage. So for people who speak thus, make it clear they are seeking a homeland. They desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Okay, first audience, reading this or hearing this for the first time. It says Genesis 2, but it's supposed to be Genesis 23 there, sorry, typo. Abraham, who had the strength, who had the divine backing to just take what he wanted by force. I've already proved that in Genesis 13. Instead, he did right by people who did not deserve it and paid a very heavy price, an unjust to himself price for doing what was right. It's very strange. If it seems a little strange to us, I assure you it seems a lot more strange to the ancient Israelites. And Yahweh's promises, interestingly, this is a repeating theme in the scripture. It's gonna bug some ancient people. They're not exclusively to males. They do not exclusively even come through males. And this is so disorienting in the cultural weather of the ancient Near East. The whole idea here is we got to go to page 1 of the Bible, where the biblical authors and the Moses team makes abundantly clear, to the chagrin of many ancient people, that he created both male and female in his image. Male and female in his image. And he does, and he will image himself through both sexes. And also interestingly, I'm sure passing through their mind, is that even though the descendants of Abraham will possess the land, this story is a reiteration narratively of the fact that the nations are going to be blessed through it. They're going to be blessed through the descendants of Abraham possessing this actual land. So what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to reflect on this in application to our own lives? So How do we go about blessing sinners without entangling ourselves in their sin? Abraham is giving us some examples here. He successfully did that with the king of Sodom. You remember that? The king of Sodom wanted to cut a deal with him, and Abraham just gave him everything that he possibly could. He's like, I don't want it to be said that I took anything from you. He did it. And now he's doing it with Ephron. I don't know where that little A came in there. Ephron the Hittite. He's giving him an exorbitant amount. So how does one do it? One doesn't worry about, being fair to oneself, or what do I deserve, or what did I work for. One is extravagantly generous, and generous in such a way that doesn't create an entanglement of obligation on the part of where you may be compromised. And Abraham has done it twice at least. When you and I set out on a project of his promise on the basis of love, in the case of Abraham, it was his love for Sarah that provokes this project of God's promise. What about righteousness? It's a project of doing right by God and others. And grace, which sometimes involves paying an exorbitant price. Is God going to bless that project? For sure. Yes. This is all about love and doing right by God and others and grace, which is kind of a theme that Jesus and the New Testament authors pick up on, isn't it? It's like, what is the fulfillment of the law? How do you sum up all of the Torah? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbors yourself. How do you do right by them? You show mercy and grace. Undeserved favor. Man, it's what God shows us, right? Why would he forgive us if we can't forgive our neighbor or our enemies? All right, so maybe we have some reflections at this table, and then it looks like we're going to have time for questions today. If there are any reflections.
I was going to say, I'm thankful that you pointed out how much Abraham loves Sarah, because earlier in the text that's not clear, and later in the text that's not so especially clear. So I love that your emphasis on that. And I believe in that cave, the last one put there was Joseph, right?
Yes, I was going to save that for the
I was
last.
Sorry. But that didn't apparently change things on how they buried people.
Yeah, so it's unclear if they kept the bones in that cave permanently. There are some that think that, they went against tradition and did so. But the text doesn't say one way or the other, yeah. Good question.
I'm from the Midwest, and this is a very typical conversation that you would have at dinner time, right? Like,
Really?
I'll get the check.
Man,
And the other person,
not
"No,
in
no,
Florida.
I will pay.
That's oh, I see, I'll pay the
But
check.
yeah, they say, no, I'll get it. Oh, no, please let me pay. It's a very typical conversation that you would have at the end of a dinner at a restaurant with another family. And so when we were reading this at the beginning, I'm thinking, man, what a great dude. Like, he is offering. But then as we go in, and just like every class that we've had, it just blows my mind about the depth that is there other than what you just think is there. Like, there's so much more to this conversation about what is he going to owe him later? Is there going to be a favor? Do you have to marry into this family at some point? And what I took away from this, the reflection that I have, is Abraham, even in his grief and mourning, is so shrewd and wise about how he deals with this.
Yep.
And it was just something that really spoke to me about, even in this time of his mourning, he's still able to process this and do this in a way that honors God.
Wise and generous at the same same time. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good reflection. Thank you. All right, no other thoughts, then we will take questions if there are any. If not, we could stop early.
We have a few, so.
Okay.
How do we know that God paid for this land out of trusting God and his promises rather than buying the land because he was worried God wouldn't give him the land?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah. So I guess there's a lens that I didn't consider because I don't think this is where the biblical authors are going. But it's a great question. Is maybe this is a sin that he paid for this land. Maybe it's a Abraham lack of faith that he didn't just trust God to give it to him for free. And yeah, that's a great question, but I don't think that that's what the Moses team is trying to do here. I think they're trying to teach us how to go about doing things with Yahweh. So remember, everything we have read so far in Genesis, from page 1, has been Yahweh looking for imagers. He's looking for people to deputize, to partner with, if you will. Yahweh, anytime, he can just do things on his own. But what he's looking for people who can express his character and his graciousness and his righteousness. And that's exactly what Abraham is doing here. He's being wise, but he's also showing the same kind of generosity and righteousness and grace that Yahweh is. And that's kind of a recurring pattern in the scriptures. So that's why I think, one of the many reasons I think that this is the point that the biblical authors are trying to make. Great question. Thank you for the challenge questions, by the way. I really do appreciate that because it helps me as well to process and think through rather than just, forge ahead in my own opinion. And I really, really love that.
In verse 15, when Ephron says that the land is worth 400 shekels of silver, and then says, "What is that between me and you?" I thought he was saying, it's nothing, just take the land. How do you know that Abraham paid for the land?
Oh, yeah. So that is exactly what he was saying. He's saying, it's, 400 land worth 400 shekels of silver. I mean, what's that between? In other words, he's maintaining here, just let me give it to you in the hearing of all these people of the area. So he can save face. It's not like he's going back on his offer to give. But the mentioning of the 400 is very strategic. This is the beginning of a bargaining. And how do we know that Abraham paid it? It says in the text that he weighed it out in the sight of everybody. So, yep.
I think that's all the questions that we have.
All right. So a little bit of a plug for next week is next week we're going to announce, as Santella said at the beginning, the next class. So I urge you not to miss this announcement. It's going to be big. And I believe also next week we're going to have the email address that you can send in questions for anything in the Bible or having to do with faith, religion, or anything else that I might not be able to answer. If you ask a question about plumbing, I'm sorry. But you can really ask anything and send those questions to the email address that we will provide to you next week. And then on our final class of this semester, which is towards the end of May, I can't think of the exact date. It'll be week number 20. That's all we're gonna do, is we're gonna respond to your questions, and this includes those of you who are online. You will be able to participate as well in this last class where we just go over questions, so you'll be able to send your questions in as well. So is that exciting? So Stump Pastor Tim is what that is. See how many times I will say, I have no idea the answer to that question. Hopefully there will be at least a few. But let's close in prayer.